Hey listeners, it's Cass. Before we get started with this week's episode, I want to bring you some content warnings. So, things to be wary of in this episode include mentions of, but are not exclusive to, cult tactics, abusive behavior, online stalking, online harassment, rape, misogyny, fatphobia, anti-semitic imagery, and transphobia. If any of those are going to be too much, totally understandable, and please take care of yourself. But let's get into the episode.
I got charging my laptop.
Hello, and welcome to Author's Note.
Don't listen.
My name is Cass.
And my name is Tease.
Tease,
Cass.
what have you been up to this week? How you doing?
Oh boy.
What's up?
Oh boy, I did so much this past week. Yeah. My grandma is moving out of her house that she's been living in for 60 years. So I've been playing the good and dutiful grandchild and been helping her move out of the house. I got my car inspected and my oil changed. I cleaned my bathroom. I looked at apartments. I've been reading. I love
Tease's chores.
Yeah, Tease's chores, which is forcing myself to clean the bathroom after staring at the bathroom for 2 weeks straight and going, "You need to clean this bathroom." But I mean, just as white dads say, living the dream. How about you?
Okay, I had and have a bunch of doctor's appointments, so you know how it is.
Yeah, both of us having our chores. I see. Mm-hmm. I'm wearing my bucket hat still, so...
You are wearing your bucket hat still. We just finished up recording Show and Tell, which is our Patreon exclusive podcast, and midway through, Tease put on their bucket hat. And, it's not the bucket hat that has me struggling to take you seriously, it's the cords on either side of the bucket hat.
I feel like a skater from the 90s.
Yeah, or a surfer.
Yeah. I'm gonna bring this to Florida with me so I blend in.
I mean, also to keep your head from getting sunburned.
That is true, yeah.
It'll be winter, but
I still don't trust Florida.
No, don't. We're closer to the equator. You get burned a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take you to the beach, though.
Do you really want to? It's cold.
I love the cold. So going to the beach on a cold day is actually kind of my ideal.
I don't know about your good pal Tease.
We'll put you in a sweater. I have plenty of sweaters. The coldest it gets is like 50 degrees. Except then we get a severe weather advisory warning. And it's like, hey, it's going to get freezing tonight. Bring in your delicate plants. It's like, oh my god.
You sweet little babies. It's gotten cold. Cass, have you been consuming any fun media lately?
Yeah, so this week I was in the mood for spooky content, so I watched playthroughs of the Dark Anthology series, which is the follow-up to Until Dawn. So I watched playthroughs for Little Hope, House of Ashes, and Man of Medan. And oh boy... Can't say I recommend any of them.
Oof, that's not good.
I think it is unfortunately one of those things where those games lean very hard on their purported technical achievements. And listen, the games do look really good, except for House of Ashes. There's like so many visual hiccups in that game. And listen, I know I only watched a playthrough, so it's a little bit different. But please trust in me that I know what I'm looking for. But I can't get over how poor the writing is. Like, the dialogue itself is really poor, and the games aren't tight, and when you're making a choose-your-own-adventure style game, I think it has to be really tight, especially your transitions. But there's so many instances of where you can tell things are awkwardly knitted together that it becomes really evident it's not really like, oh, you're choosing one story. It's like, oh... you're traveling the path of a bunch of cobbled together little things. Like, there's weird frame changes, and I can't get over the uncanny valley of the the way the characters look at the camera, they almost always have the camera super duper close to these characters because obviously different characters die and they don't want to have to worry about rendering a bunch of different cutscenes where it's like, this character has to be in this shot instead of this one. But the thing is, like, their sight lines are never totally correct. Like, they're never looking where they should be at the people they're talking to, even when they're super close to those people and supposed to be having these intimately charged moments with them. They're awkward. They're weird. And also, they don't really commit to their own bit a lot of the time, where it's like, ooh, something spooky's happening. And then they feel the need to explain it. And it's like, I don't know how to tell you that part of the appeal of horror is when things aren't explained.
Oh, that sounds like bad writing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's bad writing. It's very bad writing.
Bad writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what about you, Tease?
You know...
You got this week.
I got got by a little show called NBC Hannibal. You said, hey, Tease, we're going to do this episode. And I said, okay, Cass, I guess I'll watch the first 3 episodes of Hannibal.
Mr. Moss Mickelson really put his whole pussy into it, huh?
He sure did. Oh, my God. I mean, I've said it on the podcast before. I partake in the devil's lettuce once in a while. And I had 1/4 of a scary evil weed gummy before I watched this episode. And when I did, and when Mr. Lecter opened his mouth, I was like, it is instantaneous for these 2 motherfuckers. And I have been haunted ever since. Ever since. Oh my God. They just peacock immediately.
Yeah.
They're in love.
Yeah.
They're
real
gay
gay.
and they're in love.
The homoeroticism is slathered on so thickly with this show.
They just adopt a child. I'm baffled. And I can't stop watching.
The realism of the expedited queer experience.
Oh my God, it's like they Yule. Like, I'm waiting. I'm only on episode 5 right now. So, I mean, I'm not that far in, and I know it gets you good even more. But good golly, oof.
Are you enjoying it though?
Oh my God, it's so tasty. And I'm kind of a TV snob because it kind of all stems back to writing. Like, I feel like pretty often I'm like, I don't think the show's this good. Like, I feel like normal cable television isn't usually as good as like an HBO show or something like that. However, Mr. Brian Fuller, you have done it again.
This show was very out of place, especially for the time, which,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
This felt like prestige television on a network.
It felt like it should have been like a Showtime show. Like, not necessarily something on HBO or AMC, but like Showtime or there's another one that I'm thinking of that's not Showtime. Stars, yeah. Like the mid-level, you know?
Yeah.
And it's good. It's good. And I mean, maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a really big fan of the first seasons of American Gods, and I'm a lifelong Pushing Daisies fan, and I'm just blown away.
This podcast tangentially, with conditions, supports Brian Fuller.
Yes.
I don't know what the conditions are, but listen, they have to exist.
I've listened to I'm a really big fan of Attack of the Queer Wolf, which is a LGBT podcast about horror. And he guested on an episode, and I was like, this man's a little saucy, and I don't know if I like it. So, yeah, with conditions. But that's what I've been up to. Dealing with my grandma and watching Hannibal.
At the same time. Now, Tease, I must ask you a very difficult question as we transition into today's topic.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Final Fantasy VII house?
Oh, buddy, I sure do. I actually re-listened to our episode in preparation for this episode.
Yeah, I know you did.
I did. And you know what? Sometimes I feel guilty about how I talk, but here we are, just 2 pals gossiping about the internet. And it makes me feel better that I'm just having a conversation with you, and our listeners are just along for the ride. So for people who aren't like me and aren't going to re-listen to the Final Fantasy episode, or don't care enough to listen to it at all, Jennifer Cornet was I guess is a person who was living in the middle of Pennsylvania and kind of encouraged people to soul bond / kin characters in Final Fantasy so she could kind of manipulate them to her whims and interests. She would use a lot of cult leader tactics, such as like demanding that people pay for all of her stuff. She would get them sleep deprived. She would kind of trick them into working and paying for stuff for her. She locked people in rooms and she tried to make people regress into past lives, and she
believed that fictional characters were genuine representations of these people's past lives, and most of the time she seemed to encounter these people via online roleplay.
Yes. She was a known suicide baiter. She was abusive both emotionally and physically. There was a laundry list of issues with her. She would throw tantrums if she didn't get her way. She only wanted to eat steak and blue Gatorade, which was something that we were both very hung up on.
As a person who I self-acknowledge, I don't have a well-balanced diet, but even the idea to me of eating red meat like that constantly and washing it down with Gatorade, which is such a heavy drink, you know? Because it's full of electrolytes and sodium and sugars because it's meant to re-enter. Oh, I just can't imagine how I'd feel sweaty all the time. I already feel sweaty all the time, and I'd feel sweaty all the time.
Yeah, it sounds unpleasant. There was also a really bad issue of hoarding and not throwing out trash, and she would never bathe properly. She smelled really bad. She didn't really care about personal hygiene. It was a little bit of a hostage cult situation, and the account that we know the best of was written by somebody who was told that they are their group's Zach. And there's obviously other accounts online, but Zach's is the one that is mostly outlined and that we took our information from for the episode. So there's also a lot of history with Jennifer Cornet in relation to her pulling this multiple times in multiple fandoms. Yes. And guess what? That's what we're talking about today.
Yes.
And there's also possibly even a third episode that we could do on her for another fandom that she's been documented in as well. So that might be something down the road.
At the end of Final Fantasy VII House, we did say that she allegedly moved on to the Hannibal fandom. What I learned in researching this episode is that comes with a really big asterisk.
Interesting.
So, I am going to ask that everyone stay till the end of the episode. I know that people just have a generalized habit of like clicking onto, listening to the first 15 minutes or so, and then clicking off or listening until they feel like they've gotten the point. Please stick around to get the whole context. With any of our episodes, please stick around to get the whole context. In digging through who is allegedly Jennifer Cornet in relation to the Hannibal fandom, we actually also have to sift through the actions of a key source in this, who is named Monica Edwards, who chooses to go by Freddie Lowndes. I need to make it very clear that I am not doxing this woman by saying her full name. She has it right on her About Us page on her website that is now an abandoned archive of what she believes is Jennifer Cornet's actions in the NBC Hannibal fandom. Here is your reminder as well to leave the people we do discuss on this podcast alone. We don't condone any level of harassment or even pestering these people. Don't engage with them. Don't do it. It's not worth it. It could also be a potentially dangerous situation sometimes if you do. Information on the events that we're about to talk about is really muddy, and unfortunately much of what is recorded as our primary source is motivated by the very petty drama happening here. That is a whole element to this that makes it really, really frustrating to go through. Part of the wildness of this scenario is that Monica and, I'm going to say in air quotes, Jennifer, are Piaz and go by the same character name in Freddie Lowndes. So if I am ever mentioning Freddie Lowndes throughout this episode, I will do my best to make sure that I always clarify which Freddie I am talking about. We are going to handle this episode by first talking about Monica Edwards' story of Jennifer Cornet, and then we're going to talk about the possible issues with that story. Please take every part of Monica Edwards' version of this with a grain of salt, because I am trying to as well. This is very messy.
Oh boy.
So, NBC Hannibal ran for 3 seasons from April of 2013 to August of 2015. The story follows criminal profiler Will Graham and his relationship to his psychologist, Dr. Hannibal Lecter. We follow these two through the discovery of who Hannibal is and the crimes he has committed, including those against Will. It's a really good show that does have some genuine issues, but it's a visual feast. No pun intended. And the acting is really fantastic. It's unparalleled for something you'd see on NBC. I said it earlier, but it really did feel like prestige television being aired on NBC. Everything, like the cinematography of this show.
Oh, it's fantastic.
You know, Mads Mikkelsen put his whole pussy into it, but so did Brian Fuller.
So did Mr. Hugh Dancy as well.
Mr. Hugh Dancy as well. Hugh Dancy's doing this at the same time that Claire Danes, his wife, is doing Homeland. And it's like, are you two okay? Are you two all right? Like, are you stressed?
Y'all good?
So a really important aspect to how Hannibal changed fandom landscape was that in this 2013 era of Tumblr, the show's own Tumblr blog really got involved with fandom. They frequently reblogged fan posts, edits, and fan art. If we were looking back through a history of canonical properties engaging with fandom and how it changed the way fans interact with creators, I do think we unfortunately have to point to Hannibal and Brian Fuller as like an unfortunate change and gear toward the more negative. Not through any fault of their own, but in people's entitlement to information, engagement, etc. So Monica ends up becoming involved with who she believes is Jennifer Cornet as she has become disinterested in the NBC Hannibal show. The show is in its 2nd season when they contact each other. It is the spring of 2014, and it already has a reputation for constantly leaking information and episodes. I remember Tumblr at this period of time where it was... people would be talking about Hannibal leaks like days before the episode would come out and things would be spoiled and people would be like, oh, they didn't kiss in this episode. What's the point? And it's like, I don't know how to tell you it's not going to happen, Cheryl. It's not.
Yikes. I remember that too. That was rough.
Yeah. It was really frustrating because it was like, okay, watch the leak, sure, but then watch it when it airs because you guys want this to get renewed. It's not going to if you're only watching rips of it. So Monica notices a person who she claims has regularly chased and harassed her from fandom is reblogging a lot from this website called Tattlecrime.com. This gets even more confusing because there is Tattlecrime.org and there is Tattlecrime.com. But it is important to note that Tattlecrime.com is the website, or rather the Tumblr blog, that is being run by the person Monica believes is Jennifer Cornet.
.com?
Yes, .com.
And what is and what is the significance of the name Tattlecrime?
So, in the canon of NBC Hannibal, this is the name of Freddie Lowndes' ethically dubious reporting rag. Freddie Lowndes is a fun and sexy little reporter. I say sexy in the way Tease and I say fun and sexy little evening alone. Not to, like, objectify her.
How's your slutty little evening?
Exactly, yeah. Freddie Lowndes, you have probably seen images of her around if you have ever seen any of Hannibal. She is this tiny little lady with big, bold, red, curly hair.
And big ol' eyes.
Big ol' eyes.
Big ol' eyes.
So, this website, Tattlecrime.com, was actually just a Tumblr blog that had a custom URL, and it was run by a woman who identified herself as Frederica Avery. Frederica was constantly role-playing Freddie Lowndes, seemingly both online and in her real day-to-day life. Frederica has a partner who she refers to almost singularly as Hannibal, and one of the unfortunate recurring things with Monica's story is that there's some really, like, petty surface-level transphobia that it's hard to remove, because it could either be a testament to Monica's own lack of understanding of gender, or of Jennifer purportedly genuinely forcing people to present and identify differently, which is something she has been accused of multiple times.
Yes.
Monica claims that while Frederica insisted her partner was a trans man, Monica believed this person only enjoyed cosplaying men and had no intention of transitioning, and that they didn't identify as a man. Here is a fun caveat that Monica has been recorded across the internet as engaging in some pretty anti-feminist discourse, and generally, when you're not a feminist, that tends to kind of go hand in hand with transphobia. So again, grain of salt. Her going, I talked to this person on the phone and they're clearly not a man, is not an indication of somebody's gender.
Yikes, bad.
I want to remind everyone, too, that Monica reached out to Frederica because she believed Frederica would have information on upcoming episodes of Hannibal. Not because she actually was interested in her, and prior to this, Monica has had documented instances of just being a shitty person who quickly gets run out of communities because she's very toxic and very obsessed with being the best cosplayer, the best person putting out edits. Everything seems to be a popularity contest with her.
Unfortunate.
And she easily gets into fights with people.
Oh, yeah.
So as Monica gets closer to Frederica, she is invited into Frederica's friend circle, which they call the Tattle Staff. The Tattle Staff were expected to go to conventions on behalf of Frederica, paying their own way. Frederica would print them fake press badges that had a Tattlecrime.com label on them, as well as their names. Members of that staff include Roxy, who, quote, played Will Graham, Lauren Skaggs, who played Frederick Chilton, and a girl named Jamie. Members of
Shout out to Jamie.
Shout out to Jamie.
Shout out to
who
Jamie.
was like, please don't force kin me to anyone. Members of this group were never paid for their efforts, which seemed to include asking questions at panels, getting things signed, and a whole bunch of other bullshit. It is also worth noting that when I say these people played these characters, Frederica referred to them exclusively as Will Graham or Frederick Chilton or Hannibal. They would never be called Roxy or Lauren. Monica mentions being pulled onto endless Skype calls, and unfortunately she ended up roping her friend Sam into this. Do you remember how a certain Jennifer Cornet liked to keep people up at all hours of the evening?
So that was actually through AIM. So,
yes.
So what Jennifer Cornet would do usually is she would monitor everybody's conversations. So she would actually write down usernames and message people on AIM that she saw other people of her group, quote unquote, talking to, and kind of basically just wanted to be up in everybody's shit and up in everybody's stuff. And what she would do in real life in this poor apartment was she would purposely wake up the I believe we just referred to him as Zach in the episode. She would wake up Zach to tell him that there were either fairies or a ghost and he needed to protect the apartment. So she would wake him up in the middle of the night, like 3:00 in the morning, for an hour to do something dumb or to see a fairy circle or something. She also purposely would make you stay up for hours at night. She would decide eventually what she wanted for dinner at like 9-10 o'clock at night and then wouldn't eat until 1 a.m. So there was a lot of time fuckery and keeping people exhausted and on their toes and half awake, half asleep as well. So shocker, she's doing that with Skype too.
Yeah. So Monica gets her friend Sam roped into all of this. Sam was an artist who wanted to do artwork for Tattlecrime.com as a means of getting exposure. And Tattlecrime.com seems to be interacting a lot with the official NBC Hannibal accounts. So a lot of people are convinced that like this is a great way for them to get visibility. Frederica apparently convinced a ton of artists to work for her blog in exchange for exposure, as well as getting small business owners through Etsy to give her their work and merchandise for free. Yikes. She actually claimed that she had a direct tie to Brian Fuller, who is the creator and showrunner of NBC Hannibal, and that if they worked for her, she could eventually get them work on the show. Brian Fuller is pretty accessible on social media. Listen, if you are a teenage artist...
Fan art. Yeah, here's my fan art that's in the background of the Hannibal episode.
I'll be a concept artist on Hannibal. It's like they got a food... No. You're not even going to get hired as a PA. I'm sorry. Brian Fuller is pretty accessible on social media, and he's always been quite vocal about his support of fandom, and he even did an interview with Tattlecrime.com,
God bless him.
seemingly backing its legitimacy and connections. The Hannibal writers' Twitter had at least one interaction thanking Tattlecrime for sending gifts, and Loretta Ramos, who is the producer of Hannibal, tweeted, "There goes at Tattlecrime trying to bribe us again for news leaks. It just may work," and shows a picture of a box that is overflowing with Christmas chocolates, candy canes, and ribbon. Those tweets were from mid-December of 2014. So there was actual communication between the two. It was probably pretty one-sided, but there was like a little bit of a tie there. Not enough to get somebody a job, though. It wasn't until the third season, which was the final season of Hannibal, that Frederica would put up a disclaimer stating that she wasn't officially tied to the show and she did not represent NBC. Monica attributes that to her own work putting up a stink, but that also just could have been the NBC hitting her with some manner of cease and desist.
My uncle who works at NBC said...
Listen.
That's really what it feels like.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my uncle who works at NBC said Will and Hannibal will kiss, actually. There's going to be a nude sex scene. They filmed it. If they don't release it, they just cut it from the show, but I've seen it.
I saw it with my own two eyes. My uncle at NBC brought me to the actual filming of the episode.
According to Monica, Frederica at this point also has a really unhealthy relationship with Lauren Skaggs, who she dubbed Frederick Chilton upon bringing her into the group. Apparently, Frederica immediately assigned a character to everyone, and Monica says that this was largely based on whoever she happened to be shipping at the time. This does sort of fall in line with what happened with Final Fantasy VII House.
Yes.
Wherein we also know that Jennifer Cornet tried to literally set people up or expected them to engage in physical and sexual relationships because she decided they were those characters, and she shipped them.
It's bad. Don't ship people in real life. Welcome. I feel like my exhaustion has transferred over to you after I made Final Fantasy VII House.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Welcome. We share it together. We share this burden together.
Frederica believed, according to Monica, that the NBC Hannibal show was a direct reflection of her life and that she truly was Freddie Lowndes.
Oh, girl, seek help.
Allegedly, Frederica met Lauren online when Lauren was only 17 and immediately worked to convince her that she was her only friend in the world and that everyone was out to get her. The timeline is really not clear on a lot of this because, again, we are going from Monica's version of this story and she doesn't lay out a very clear timeline. I don't know how old Lauren is by the time Monica meets her. But apparently Lauren and Frederica began correspondence when she was only 17. And at some point she becomes a legal adult in all of this. So I think around this time she's 18 or 19.
Okay.
Around July of 2014, Monica recounts how Mads Mikkelsen's first convention appearance is announced. Sam, Monica's artist friend, was going in quote-unquote official Tattlecrime staff capacity. Frederica yelled at her on the phone all day and apparently forced Sam over phone to return to the autograph room to get a photo of Moss holding the Tattlecrime business card, which he was like really hesitant to do and didn't want to take a photo with it for obvious reasons.
Don't blame you.
Yeah, like nobody wants to just hold some random person's business card, and like I think Sam told her on multiple occasions, like, he doesn't want to do it. And Frederica was like, no, he needs to, because she wanted it so she could use it both as site promotion, as well as a way to make her Tumblr blog with a custom URL look more legitimate.
Ew.
Roxy
that was such a wild time for Tumblr.
It really was.
Yeah.
Roxy and Lauren at the same time were at San Diego Comic-Con attempting to buy up as many of the special edition Hannibal Funko Pops so that Frederica could use them as giveaway material for the blog. They stood in line for hours and did not get even one of them. I don't have this part outlined in my notes, but it is worth noting that one of the quote-unquote crimes of Frederica Avery is the multitude of times she ran giveaways or promised prizes that were never ever delivered Or she included images from things that she didn't have any ownership over. So she would like take images from Etsy's and be like, here's part of the giveaway. And the people would be like, why are you using my photos of my product that you haven't purchased and doing a giveaway with them? It was that kind of shit.
Weird.
As summer winds into fall, Sam tells Monica that she should stop talking to Frederica, but doesn't provide an immediate reason. Monica shares that these Skype meetings Frederica regularly insisted on were at all hours of the day and night, and if you didn't appear for them, Frederica would throw an absolutely wild tantrum. Sam tells Monica that she and other artists created work that was to be sent to the Hannibal writers and Brian Fuller, but Frederica only credited herself and Lauren when it was sent. Lauren, at this time, is also going to travel across the country to meet Frederica in person for the first time. At this time, no one in the group has ever seen a photo of Frederica, and no one knows who she actually is or what she looks like. She refuses to be on video during calls. She only shares pictures of her hands, feet, or a wig she wears. If you are so interested and you seek out Monica's version of the story, there is an obscene amount of bitter pettiness in her account of everything, which really doesn't help her credibility. She claims that she warned Lauren against going, telling her that she would be raped if she went, which is a really far leap to make. And everyone's like, did you actually say that, or are you just kind of that unhinged as a person? There's also a lot of Monica being really bitter that apparently Frederica is known as the best Freddie Lowndes cosplayer, but she's never seen a picture of her face. And it's like, Monica, chill. This is not what this is about.
I'm telling you, she's lying.
This whole debacle is no doubles. I'm not joking.
That's what it really sounds like.
I'm not making fun of people who kin either, but like that is just the scenario we're dealing with here. Except it's then muddied with a really disturbing amount of mental illness and internet drama.
Yes, definitely.
Lauren acknowledges apparently that in some ways Frederica isn't good for her, and that they all then decide as a group that if things get too bad, Sam will drive to pick Lauren up in Illinois, where Frederica is currently living. Also, apparently, Frederica refers to her house as the murder house. Don't stop that. Don't do that. I don't care if it's a funny little joke in your friend group. Don't. Stop. Don't be like, yeah, come visit me at my murder house. No. Stop that.
Thank you.
Stop. No. Get some help.
Feels bad. Feels bad. Don't like that one bit.
Tease, are you excited to come visit me in my murder house?
I would, yes.
On October 30th, 2014, Lauren arrives at Frederica's, and Monica sends what is apparently a scathing email telling Frederica everything she thinks of her, which is also really frustrating because you would think if your friend is going into what you believe to be a dangerous situation, you would not try and aggravate the person who they are going to be staying. Lauren, via text with Sam, shares that Frederica is having a breakdown and she locks herself in the bathroom for 3 hours, which is also behavior we're very familiar with from Final Fantasy VII House. Frederica apparently only agreed to come out of the bathroom if Lauren would hold her, kiss her, and stroke her hair, which Monica says Lauren didn't want to do, but eventually felt she had no choice.
Also, obviously, people who are poly live, let live. But if Frederica is in a relationship with good old Hannibal, where is her partner in the situation? Isn't that a little uncomfortable for her partner? So on and so forth. That feels like a red flag to me of manipulation on a very obvious and uncomfortable level.
Yes. Agreed. For as long as Lauren, who identified as an ace cisgender woman, apparently was at the house, Frederica only referred to her as Frederick or Tux, which was a reference to her Tumblr username. Lauren had traveled to see Frederica with her own money and was apparently not allowed to leave Frederica's house without her present and without Frederica's partner Hannibal present. Lauren was forced to drive them everywhere on her own dime, and while only originally planning to stay for 2 weeks, only returned home after a month, completely broke, according to Monica.
Which is what happened also with Final Fantasy House.
Mm-hmm. As Monica tells it, when Lauren arrived home, she shut herself in her room for several days and spoke to no one. Apparently, both her parents and brother wanted to get the police involved, though it's not clear in what capacity or on what grounds. Lauren says she hates Frederica, according to Monica. Less than a month later, however, Lauren drops everything and moves from Utah to Illinois to move in with Frederica. Some versions of this story state that Lauren first lived in her own apartment in the area before moving in with Frederica, but it's unclear. Lauren begins asking for loans from people regularly, but doesn't pay them back, and everyone eventually cuts her off because they know she's asking for money on behalf of Frederica. Monica attempts to commission Lauren as a way of giving her money, but Frederica sends that money back and says that Monica is evil and it's a trick. Yeah. In December of 2014, Frederica forces Lauren to churn out art pieces every week to promote episodes of Hannibal, and in turn, her Tattlecrime blog. Monica believes Frederica has well and truly brainwashed Lauren, who, though she acknowledges Frederica is bad for her, believes she's the only woman who will ever care about her. And while we know that Lauren and Frederica met online when Lauren was only 17, it's unclear how old Lauren is during these events, though it's believed she's a legal adult, so she is at least 18 years old again.
I would hope.
Sam and Monica at this point hypothesize that the reason Frederica doesn't show her face online or in any calls must be because she's a wanted criminal or people were after her. Listen... You can be suspicious of people not showing their faces online, but it doesn't mean they're a criminal. And please, it doesn't excuse any of the supposed behavior here, but some people just genuinely don't want photos of themselves and don't like being on camera. This was just a huge leap in logic for them. I think the really important reason to keep in mind Lauren's age here is because if she's 18, she can't necessarily be reported as a missing person if she left of what is seemingly her own volition. So that's a huge part of this. Someone sends Monica at this point a link to the Sarah saga and the story of the Final Fantasy VII house. And Monica tweets at Frederica, "Jennifer Cornet, is that you?" Within days, Frederica's account is marked as private, and a month later, Tattlecrime closes and it states it won't be coming back. Monica reached out to Zach of the Final Fantasy VII house, and though he said it sounded like her, he couldn't confirm. Other members of Jennifer Cornet's former cult were able to identify her voice from YouTube videos and other recordings on the Tattlecrime website, but that's not positive, infallible proof. Monica believes that Frederica manipulated and brainwashed Lauren into identifying as a man and cutting off all of her hair. At this point, let's just read directly from Monica. What happened? Tease?
The following is what transpired after the show Hannibal ended. Jennifer's partner, fiancé, husband, whatever, kicked her and Lauren out of the house in Lake Forest, Illinois. Lauren and Jennifer went back to Utah, where they rented a house from Lauren's grandmother. Lauren was only allowed to leave when Jennifer let her, and no one was allowed to come over to see Jennifer or hang out, and Jennifer never left the house in Utah. However, Lauren's mother was the one who approached me. After reading my website and seeing my videos, she asked me how I knew all of this had happened and if I was involved with the original group. If I was one of her victims. I said yes, kind of, but definitely not more than Lauren was. It was then that Lauren's mother told me that Jennifer was using the name Constance Flynn and police were involved, but we'd be in touch. It wasn't until Lauren's mother got a hospital bill in Jennifer's name that she believed that woman was Jennifer Cornet. I showed her mother a very old photograph of Jennifer and asked if that was the woman she had met. Her mother confirmed it was the same person, but the person she knew was about 200 pounds heavier. It was then that I got my confirmation. The only problem was about a month before that point, when police got involved. Lauren and Jennifer rented a moving truck and left. The last known alleged location for Lauren and Jennifer was a visiting relatives in Oregon. Even though a bunch of people from the Final Fantasy VII house insisted that Jennifer does not have any relatives in Oregon. Where they are as of now is not known, but they are still together as far as I know. Lauren is still with Jennifer, even though her family and her friends want her to go home.
Are there any, like, red flags to you in that, Tease?
Tons.
Yeah.
I think something that actually really sticks out to me is the 200 pounds heavier comment.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you know any people who became fatter later in life, but 200 pounds makes you look a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to say for a fact that somebody, I mean, yeah, it could be wishful thinking, but unless you have like a very specific facial feature, it's hard to tell, you know, or like a tattoo or something to physically prove it's them. And I think that's kind of unfair. And I think what's also frustrating is that, like, how do you get a hospital bill under somebody else's name if you don't insure them, if you have no, like, don't you have to sign off on that to have it paid off under somebody else's name or something like that? Like,
yeah, there's some weirdness
right
going on with that, with this idea that, like, is it Jennifer who is insuring Lauren, and so Lauren puts her home address as being her parents? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, also, a lot of the people involved in Final Fantasy VII House, that was like, what, 1998, 1999, maybe?
People move.
2000?
Yeah.
People move, and also, I don't know, how do you find people from Final Fantasy VII House? I mean, there was a lot of them, but they were also scattered the hell all over the internet. And I mean, how many of them are traceable at this point? They're probably like in their 40s now. And I mean, obviously, like, some people have some pretty easy paper trails or whatever, but there's a lot to be skeptical in this. Like, I don't not believe that this couldn't happen. You know what I'm trying to say? But there's a lot of holes in this. So.
Yeah, what is noticeable in particular, or notable, I should say, in particular, about the 200 pounds heavier comment, and I don't know if I put this into my notes. If I do, then I'll come back to it. But there is an incident in which Monica posts two pictures of two different women and says, "This is Jennifer Cornet." And people come forward and say, "Oh my God, no, that's not. That's my friend, or that's me, or that's a photo from this instance. That's not Jennifer Cornet." And Monica backtracks. So, we need to talk about Monica. Most people watching all of this from the outside believe that Monica is just as bad as Frederica, nay, Jennifer, when it comes to her online behavior. The term persecution complex gets thrown around a lot. I need you all to understand that I went to 4chan for you. I went to 8chan for you. I went to LawCow for you to bring you this episode.
In November, I went to something awful for Final Fantasy House. I was like banging on the doors of my friends. I was like, "Do you have something awful login that I can have?" Like, I suffered. We both have suffered for this saga.
In November of 2014, Monica started a blog on Tumblr called The Truth About Tattlecrime, which saw very little traction, but it was where she recorded all of her accusations against Frederica. This blog was the foundation for the current tattlecrime.org, where Monica's story is recorded. She also had a series of videos, which is how we originally found out about this, but they are so exhausting to go through, and they're not even publicly available anymore. She has deleted them because of obvious criticism, and I'll come back to that. In mid to late 2015, a Reddit user by the name of The Unburnt One creates multiple threads repeating Monica's accusations. 2 months later, Monica comments on a Vice article about the Final Fantasy VII house, saying that she knew Jennifer Cornet, and in a comment that was deleted, she linked to her tattlecrime.org website, hoping that Vice would explore that as well. Yeah. Yeah. In February of 2016, a YouTube channel named Freddy Lounds begins a series of videos aimed at Tattlecrime, which is Frederica's Tattlecrime, not Monica's Tattlecrime. She presents herself essentially as Freddy Lounds and is, RPing her. In March of 2016, an anonymous user starts a thread on /Baphomet, which is an 8chan board for deep web resources, hacking, and raids. You know, not a great or well-informed place to go. And if you kind of need an idea of what /Baphomet is like at the time this anonymous user started their thread, their header image included an image of Hitler posed to appear as though he was having anal sex with Anne Frank. So, you know,
yikes.
That's the kind of place we're talking about. This anonymous user expresses concern for a vulnerable friend, stating that they've hired a PI to try and track down Frederica, but that Frederica also has herself and the vulnerable friend convinced they're fictional characters. There is a lot of body shaming in this one little post, which has been par for the course for Monica in all of her posting. It is not obviously clear if this anonymous user is Monica. Most people believe it is, though. As this story becomes more and more entangled with the Final Fantasy VII house, more people have come out to talk about Monica herself. Many people have called her a stalker. She has been linked to various anti-feminist blogs and accounts. Monica adds claims of all of this to the now defunct Fannibal Family Wiki.
Hannibal Family Wiki?
Yes. At one point, she even apparently sold an ebook on Amazon called The Sickening Truth Behind the NBC Hannibal Fandom by Monica Edwards.
Stop.
Monica really hates Fannibals. Like, really hates them despite being one.
Baby, the call's coming from inside the house.
Someone pointed out that she talks a lot. She's very much like... She tries to present herself as like a fandom purist and a purist of the original movie and books, but then will like call things out on not being accurate to them, and people are like, no, that was accurate to the book, and this thing that you love wasn't. I don't think you've actually ever read the book, Monica. I don't think you've ever seen the original movie.
God.
We really don't have a way of verifying the veracity of any of Monica's claims. She has deleted her YouTube series multiple times over, and she has even stated on the Tattlecrime.org post that, quote, all the information I have written here is the truth as I know it. I do have a lot of proof to back up what I'm saying, but since people think I'm lying anyway, I'm not going out of my way to upload and provide it. Which is so stupid and so frustrating for so many reasons. And I'll be totally honest, listener. I didn't reach out to her. I don't necessarily want to interact with her. I hope you can understand why.
Don't. I don't want you to. Because then that would, like, alert her. That would wake her up. Like, no, don't do that to yourself.
Again, there have been instances of Monica posting photos claiming they're of Jennifer Cornet /Frederica, but people very quickly verified that it's not her. According to various people on the r/Tattlecrime subreddit, she is notorious for becoming aggressive with anyone who questions or confronts her, or even asks for clarification about parts of her story. I think what is immediately a tip-off to me, again, about the 200 pounds heavier comment, is it's a comment she has made herself about having seen previous photos of Jennifer Cornet. There is very little, if any, substantial proof that Jennifer Cornet and Frederica are the same person. Like, we just have to acknowledge that. Things are similar, things sound very similar, but wilder coincidences have happened. A lot of Monica's animosity that I have culled from all of this is a very thinly veiled gatekeeping and disagreements over the show's canon. It is ridiculous how much of her account is just saturated with stupid fandom drama. And I say that lovingly, but it's just stupid fandom drama.
Sounds like it.
Monica's fury at Frederica's obsession with Freddie Lounds begins to feel less like a critique and more like jealousy over Frederica's popularity as compared to Monica's own. Various videos Monica made about Frederica seem to have the sole purpose of disagreeing with the in-character Freddie Lounds diary entries that Frederica wrote. She just is, like, very hung up on this RP, and I am not joking when this... It just reads like a really bad RP forum beef that got too far out of its little sector.
People who like, I never RP'd, but I have friends who were really into it, and my God, people take this shit so seriously for no reason.
They really do. They really do.
No, thank you.
People also rightfully question why Monica got so involved with Frederica when she seems to have disliked her from the outset, which is another huge red flag. Like, you went looking for conflict with this person and you found it, and then you got really upset about it and have made it your life goal to, like, out her in some way. And I'm not saying she shouldn't be held accountable for her actions, but I'm saying this whole scenario is so messy, and it is so overwhelming in its just level of, like, get off Tumblr, sign off, do something else.
Like we always say, have other hobbies outside of online interaction.
Just having other hobbies outside of your hyperfixation. And I understand hyperfixations, but hyperfixations do not excuse shitty behavior ever, on no level. They explain. They do not excuse. People also really rightfully question why no one seems to know about this story or the supposed disappearance of Lauren outside of this very small fandom circle, especially given that Lauren's own mother supposedly contacted Monica. There's no, like, call to action of, like, our daughter is missing. There's no attempting to, like, do outreach to news networks of, like, we feel, you know, that we just want our daughter to come home kind of thing. There's none of that. There's none of that. This is just a story that Monica is spreading.
Also, I don't know about you, but my mom, like, knows I have internet friends, but she doesn't know how to reach them. She doesn't know their names. She doesn't know, like, if I were to go missing, I think my mom would probably be like, well, shit, what do I do? Because, like,
how did your mom find this, like, weird website called tattlecrime.org, and why did she read it? And
unless, like, it happened to be that, like, Lauren talked about it so much that, because, like, I get it. Some people actually, their parents listen when they talk about fandom and don't tell them to stop talking. I'm never going to let her live that down. She will never listen to this episode, but she will never live it down. And I don't know. There's holes. There are big holes.
There's big old holes. There's big old holes in the way that reason and the oddity of life do not account for. Monica is a fixated and mean-spirited gatekeeper at best. She has devoted both entire blogs and whole videos to bullying members of fandom for personal issues she takes with them, or simply for making fun of them for literally just having fun and enjoying perfectly lighthearted fan creations. Because she just seems like a mean person. Like, I'm sorry, she's a bully.
Boo.
At this point, I would also like to share, for the sake of clarity, that Monica has also been known to go by the name Eve, as well as Layla Dawson, who is one of her original characters. Again, this is not me doxing her. This is all publicly accessible information that she has made accessible to people. But she also has a really, really, really bad reputation in every fandom she's been a part of. A since-deleted Reddit account added to the discussion on r/Tattlecrime, which is its own subreddit. Tease, can you please read this?
Yes. Since Eve offered me up for public scrutiny on her channel, I have actually been contacted by 3 other people who have been targeted by Eve. These are people Eve has made videos about and claimed to have exposed as scammers, cult leaders, or just unstable people. What these people have had to tell me, backed by screenshots, paints a picture of Eve as a nasty, jealous, and delusional bully, not above harassing the families of her targets. Her targets are people simply enjoying their hobbies and chosen fandoms, some of whom have managed to make a bit of loose change from fanfic-based Patreon/Ko-fi accounts. Since Eve has tried, and spectacularly failed, to generate income from the same streams, I can only speculate her primary motivation for selecting targets is jealousy. For the record, the recent photos she posted of Jennifer were only not of Jennifer. They were of 2 entirely different women. We've had confirmation of that from Jen's ex-boyfriend and from some people who knew Jennifer back in the mid-2000s. Also, I found and spoken to one of the women Eve misidentified as Jennifer. Wrong age, wrong location, completely different person. I have shared your skepticism over whether or not she really identified Jennifer in the Hannibal fandom since day one. When I discovered Eve's channel, I did my own Googling and uncovered years of Eve's mad fixation around this, with her bizarre scattershot accusations that seem to rope in anyone who has ever wronged her. Her conduct on forums give you a sense of how she would have conducted herself in fandoms in which she claimed she was bullied. This isn't evidence in itself that Eve is wrong about Jennifer having entered the Hannibal fandom, but because so much of Tattlecrime saga is devoted to rehashing petty fandom spats and diversions about people she doesn't like, you have to understand that we're getting this story through the lens of an incredibly unreliable narrator.
Monica tangles so much of her own opinions about the Hannibal fandom into her beliefs about Frederica and how her fandom opinions make or prove her character as a human being. That's a huge part of this. Everyone involved is a deeply unreliable narrator, and while most of Monica's own evidence is thin at best, members of the Final Fantasy VII house have identified Jennifer Cornet's voice in Frederica, and that's what has led most people to believe that the two are connected. While Zach of Final Fantasy VII House's testimony is about warning people away from Jennifer, Monica has made hers wrapped around an internal fandom popularity contest, her personal opinions on Frederica's body, and lastly, about Frederica's actual behavior. So we've got unreliable narrators. We have one unreliable narrator, right? And that unreliable narrator has been shown to have a really disturbing persecution complex in a lot of ways. And if you happen to have seen her channel and you watched her whole Skarsgård scammer video, that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But she got really fixated on a girl who was a fan of Bill Skarsgård and started calling her a scammer because she was just like really irresponsible with money, and she would take commissions and she wouldn't deliver them, or she would deliver them like months later. But like what Monica fixates on is that she called people her babies and that she was their mommy and things like that. And it's just like, wow, you really have a beef with somebody having any sort of online personality and any sort of online following that they're, you know, utilizing to further their career. And listen, yes, parasocialism, bad, unilaterally. But that whole video is just an exhausting thing to watch. It's not available anymore because she was criticized and she took it down. And it's one thing when one person is raising an issue about something that's like, there's genuine documented evidence and there's something really to be talked about there, and other people see it when they look at it. But this really feels a lot like Monica cobbled together a bunch of her own drama and a bunch of her own feelings, and she has turned it into this story that she's now trying to sort of capitalize off of because of the popularity of Final Fantasy VII House, which is really frustrating. And it's like, if Lauren is in any danger, you've ruined any chances of helping her because you've made this so much about yourself and your own personal weird fandom hang-ups.
Yeah.
How do you feel about all this, Tease?
Bad.
Yeah? Bad in what ways?
Yuck.
Yeah.
Just yuck. I think something that we talk a lot about on this show is that though we love fandom, we also, I think, especially because we do all this research, we see the more insidious side of fandom. And it's really frustrating because fandom is a fantastic way to make friends and to learn about new interests and new hobbies and to explore your hobbies in ways that you might have never possibly thought about, especially through fan art and fan fiction and cosplay and crafting. I mean, I've seen some really fantastic and exciting stuff made by fans for series before. And then it's a really great way to make friendships. And yet when something becomes a competition or something becomes, well, this is mine and not yours, and there's all this weird gatekeeping, it becomes really frustrating. And to see something that could very well, if it was different circumstances and different situations, these people could have been really good friends with each other, you know? And it's upsetting and frustrating to see, to show that it makes me feel bad because I know to normal people this isn't that deep. Like, I know, like, oh, ooh, my friend left me, for another friend, like, it happens. But when it becomes your whole personality and your whole life to the point where you obsess over people this way, it's not healthy. And I feel bad for all parties involved for different reasons. Yeah. Like, I know we say, like, seek help or go outside or whatever and stuff like that, but it's genuinely upsetting when there's a possibility that somebody's in danger and you're just doing this, though, for your own gain, if that is really the case, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Or your priority in telling that person's story to try and get them help is how you were wronged in these comparably small and petty ways. Yeah. Even in this one discussion where she's talking purportedly to Lauren's mother, and Lauren's mother asks her if, you know, she was one of Jennifer Cornet's victims, and Monica apparently says, I said yes, kind of, but definitely not more than Lauren was. And it's like, I'm sorry, it's not comparable. It's not comparable having a shitty friend and potentially being brainwashed and taken advantage of.
Did Lauren's mom actually ever meet Jennifer? Like, if Lauren went to Jennifer's house instead of Lauren going to Jennifer going to Lauren's, you know what I'm saying? Like, when would there be a possibility that Lauren's mom would actually meet Jennifer? I mean, unless, like, she just happened to see a few photos from the trip, maybe. Yeah. But if Jennifer is that selective of who takes photos of her, I doubt she would pose for a photo.
Yeah.
So there's tons of loopholes in the situation. Yeah. The more I think about this, I don't know if this is even true to begin with. Yeah. Like, I mean, like you were saying, this does feel like a really crazy coincidence if it was, like, if this was legit and if it's not Jennifer. But so many things are not properly adding up.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we only have one primary source, and that primary source is incredibly biased towards herself looking like some kind of weird investigative hero because she's role-playing as Freddie Lowndes.
Yeah.
So, hi. Big takeaways from this episode. We don't know that Frederica Avery is Jennifer Cornet, and I think that's the really important thing I want people to sit with, because everyone's like, oh, she did it again, the Hannibal fandom. We don't know that. We really don't. We don't have an answer. All of this quite genuinely could be totally formulated.
Yeah. This could be a scapegoat situation.
It really could, you know? It could be something where, like, Lauren found a really healthy relationship in Frederica that, you know, somebody else didn't have, and they got upset about it. We don't know. It is a messy and confusing situation, but hopefully we have offered enough to clarify a little bit. So the next time you hear somebody say, like, oh, Jennifer Cornet, she was in the Hannibal fandom, you can be like, well, no, kind of.
Consider the following.
Have you listened to Author's Note? Don't listen.
Which is what we do with all our friends. We really do. It's becoming a joke at this point.
Rip to all of my friends who are like, Cass, have you heard about this? And I'm like, hi, I have an episode about it.
Literally me tapping my own mic. Hello? Hello? We have an episode?
You know what? If you made it to the end of this episode, thank you. I appreciate you for sticking through. You. And it's great to have you here. I'm sorry you're here. I really am. Because now you're burdened with this knowledge that I also have. Before we move into the end credits of the episode, so to speak, this is your reminder. Don't engage with any of the people we've discussed. Leave them alone. I say this for your own sake. It's not worth it. It's not
worth it.
Take care of yourself. Evaluate your distance to the things you love. Are you too into it? Do you need to take a break? Do you need to find some distance so that you can enjoy things on a level that is more appropriate and healthy for you? Maybe. Maybe. This has been Author's Note. Don't listen. We have a new episode every week. I feel like it's been forever since I've done this, and I don't know why, because it hasn't. But I'm just like, hi, my name is Cass. You can find information about us on our website. That's authorsnotepod.com. And if you really liked the episode, you know, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Tell a friend about us. Be like, hey, do you want to listen to this wild and fucked up crazy ride with me as we go on a car journey?
Drive to a con and listen to the pod.
Stop.
Let's go.
Author's Note is required listening on your way to a convention. Also wear your mask at that convention. Do it. Even if you're vaxxed. Do it.
Be safe. Be smart.
If you really enjoyed the episode, though, we do have a Patreon where we post fun and cool and sexy little bonus episodes for our patrons, and they also get to vote in polls on what our future episodes will be. That is Author's Note Pod over on Patreon. And if you don't want any of the bonuses, but you just want to toss a couple bucks our way, we are also on Ko-fi. That's Ko-Fi, and we're Author's Note Pod over there. My name is Cass, and you can find me pretty much everywhere across the internet at Valhethella. That's Valhethella. Yes, my parents do get very upset and confused every time they try and pronounce it. I know. It's upsetting. Jeez, where can people find more of you at?
You can find me at Vicuña. That's Vicunad. You could also find me on the Fresh Podcast Market, a real podcast about fake podcasts. We make up ideas for podcasts that do or don't exist. We don't really check. And then we make up bad ideas for them. And then we talk about possible episodes. It's really fun. And you could also you can't really follow me, but you could also read some of my writing at Fandom Spotlight, which is a fandom news and information site. And I write a lot of fun manga reviews, and I'm going to write a review about Pikmin Bloom really soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that if you like that. Our theme music is done by James Yaiullo. You can find him on Bandcamp under James Y. And Cass, who did our cover art?
Our cover art is done by the wonderful, the incredible, the immutable, the unattainable Nyaliest. You can find her on Twitter at Nyaliest. That's Nyalliest. Gamers, Endwalker's coming. We got a fun bonus coming. See you soon. Make sure to get your vaccine if you haven't already. Get your booster if you're eligible too. Wow, it'll probably knock you on your ass, but that's better than the alternative.
Yeah.
I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thanks. I'm a little loopy right now. Bye.
Bye.